I'm Billy S. Today we're ranking every water dungeon in the Legend of Zelda series from worst to best. I've done individual dungeon rankings for each game in the series, but now it's time to mix things up and get into some themed rankings. And let's be real, the water dungeons are by far the most divisive and the most diverse. To qualify, the dungeons in question must feature water as a prominent part of their traversal, puzzles, or both, which means the Marine Temple from Spirit Tracks and Catfish's Maw from Link's Awakening don't qualify, as while they are set in watery locations, they don't actually feature water puzzles or traversal. I also don't consider Tower of the Gods from Wind Waker a water dungeon, as the ship sequence makes up a vast minority of the dungeon's puzzles, but that's just my call. So let's jump right in. All 13 water dungeons in the Legend of Zelda, ranked. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. At number 13, we have the Angler's Tunnel from Link's Awakening. If you told me a few years ago that this would be my least favourite water level in the series, I might have laughed in your face. But with the hindsight of having replayed the entire series over the last few years, I've come to realise that my nostalgia goggles were strapped on hard for this dungeon. Angler's Tunnel has a very strict layout, where as long as you're collecting all you need to progress, you'll be fine. But should you miss a single key, you'll suffer needing to do a ton of backtracking to look for what you've forgotten. Something that happened to me when I realised I'd missed a key early on and couldn't figure out where it was for the life of me. The dungeon does make up for this with a great ambiance. The colour scheme is right up my alley and just screams a cavern drenched in water. And the flippers are a fun dungeon item that allows for swimming in deep water, creating a perfect item check for gatekeeping the second half of the dungeon. The mini-boss against Cue Ball is also pretty fun too, albeit by the time you beat him and get the warp back to the entrance, you're already past the point where that warp is useful. A shout out to the scene early on where you see a key drop into a pool of water and it's only after you get the flippers that you can dive into a 2D section to retrieve it. But ultimately, the most interesting part of the dungeon has already been covered. I don't think Angler's Tunnel does much with the water theme in terms of puzzles in the same way that the other 2D water dungeons do, but that's not a surprise. It's one of the oldest in the video, and it was on a handheld Zelda with more limitations than its console counterparts. Also, I just really hate the music in the remake. They tried to meld a gorgeous new melody with the beeps and boops of the original Game Boy theme, and I've just never been a big fan of those types of remixes. It's the contrast between the two types of music that just isn't pleasant to my ears, which is a real shame. On the plus side, the boss fully embraces the water theme. On the downside, it's the anglerfish, and depending on your version, you either get a competent yet simple encounter, or the easiest boss in the franchise. Take your pick. At number 12, we have the Lakebed Temple from Twilight Princess. This was a dungeon I was excited for during my last replay of the game, as I figured playing Twilight Princess as an adult would make some of the experience easier. Instead, I realized that the Lakebed Temple simply isn't very well designed, and some of the design decisions they made don't really translate into fun gameplay. Now, the one cool aspect of this temple is the changing of the water flow. You activate flowing water on the east and west side of the temple, while flipping the central staircase to create ramps for the water to go down, which allows you to access different areas. This is a cool concept, but I think it could have been done better than it was. I immediately think about those rooms with the flowing water, and how once you get the claw shot, you're able to revisit them to collect treasure chests at their peak. The problem being, you either walk up the water ramp extremely slowly with the iron boots, or you try to skirt along the railing to the side, which can very easily have you slipping off to the bottom. And in the remaster on the Wii U, one of the chests contains a fucking Miiverse stamp, so I had no reason to go up here and grab it. I also think Lakebed is a bit too easy to break the flow of for its place in the game. You can get to the room with the boss key without actually having completed the main puzzle that easily gets you to that room. Some parkour in this hall gets you there early, but that throws off the rest of the progression as I suddenly didn't know where to go. I found myself very confused trying to reach the westernmost room to activate the water flow, and it led to me needing to actively look up where to go. None of the other dungeons in the game required that, it's just something that water temples seem to suffer from in this series. And then the boss fight. Morpheal is so vast in its second phase, and yet the entire battle feels so underwhelming. There's a sense of scale in the cinematic, but then the gameplay is bare bones and fairly lackluster. If it weren't for us getting the iconic Zant cutscene moments after this temple concludes, I wouldn't even think about this part of the game, and I just think all the other 3D water temples convey their puzzles and their progression far better. At number 11, we have the divine beast, Vah Ruta from Breath of the Wild. For what it's worth, I have grown to enjoy the divine beasts for what they are, as opposed to what I wished they could be, yet even then, comparing a fairly compact puzzle scenario like Vah Ruta to an expansive water dungeon like the Great Bay Temple from Majora, or the Ancient Cistern from Skyward Sword, there's no comparison. The main puzzles come from using the divine beast's trunk to move a torrent of water around the structure. You use it to turn off flames, you use it to power water wheels that activate machinery that Link can interact with, you can even climb on it, which is required for one of the 5 terminals perched on the backside of the trunk. This, for me, is the most memorable moment of the dungeon, with other mentions going to using the Cryonis rune to freeze up machinery and manipulate the water around you. Ultimately, there's just not much to talk about here. You kill the Gloom Eyes, you activate 5 terminals in any order you want, then you face Waterblight Ganon, who is actually one of the better bosses in this game. I like the way Cryonis is useful in his arena when he floods it, and the DLC where you have to fight using Mipha's kit only emphasizes how well designed this encounter is. Heck, even getting into the dungeon can be pretty fun, with you riding on Sidon and shattering Cryonis cubes before firing shock arrows onto weak spots. It's a memorable experience, one of the better dungeons in Breath of the Wild, but just not really what I enjoy in a Zelda dungeon myself. At number 10, we have Jabal Ruins from Echoes of Wisdom, the most recent water dungeon in the series, and one that I feel was afraid to take too many risks. Echoes of Wisdom is the closest game we've had since Oracle of Ages to being a straight puzzle experience. Most of the echoes are used in either platforming or puzzle scenarios, with combat being less at the forefront. So I was expecting the water temple of this game to bring something new to the table, and it just didn't. The central gimmick is a water spout where you need to find 5 coloured switches to raise its water level higher and higher, which isn't actually a gimmick when you think about it, it's a glorified elevator that tries to seem like it's a gimmick. Instead, you have 4 linear paths split across 2 floors, and you deal with the puzzles inside. The dark and side-scroll segments underwater are a lot of fun, as you have to use the anemones to light your way while avoiding hidden Deku Babas, and many of the rooms involve using a lot of platforming above pools of water that can be fun to figure out, even if you end up defaulting to either the bed platforms or the brand new water block, the most powerful movement echo in the game. But the yellow path was easily the best. You had to frogger your way across moving platforms while water slowly pushes you towards a precipice. It requires quick thinking to get through, and leads into a puzzle room with multiple switches, where the developers ask you to hit them in any order, in any fashion that you like. I appreciate that open-endedness, and I wish it extended to the rest of the temple. Shout out to the very cool opening though, where you fall through a hole in the floor and are chased underwater by Vocavor, this dungeon's boss. I usually prefer to have bosses be hidden until the boss room, as I love the excitement of not knowing what I'm about to face, but getting chased down into the dungeon proper really hypes you up. This dungeon, along with quite a few in Echoes of Wisdom, just needed to go a bit further with their puzzles and their layouts, but it still stands above our previous entries because I think that designing dungeons for an entirely new playstyle like that of Echoes of Wisdom Zelda requires a lot of forethought, and this wasn't a bad first attempt, just too linear. At number 9, we have the Water Temple from Tears of the Kingdom, which inexplicably takes place in the fucking sky? Make it make sense, Nintendo, it's been 2 years, I still don't understand why you did this. The Tears of the Kingdom Water Temple is one of the dungeons I was most harsh on during my Tears of the Kingdom dungeon ranking, because I feel like they dropped the ball in a lot of ways. It feels like a glorified sky island as opposed to an actual dungeon, with good puzzle design that is marred by there being nothing outside of said puzzles. It's 5 floating platforms in the sky where the boss arena is the largest. It's incredibly easy to get between them, meaning there's not much challenge. There are only 4 terminals to shut down instead of the 5 I was used to coming from the wind and fire temples, and there just wasn't enough to keep me hooked here. But I digress. Combining the dungeon itself with the Sky Island ascent, I can see more cases for the water temple being interesting. You have a low gravity gimmick that allows you to jump super high, whilst using recoil on the various water bubbles to swim your way up was a lot of fun. It beats the usual attach rocket to shield method to get up high in this game. And as I said earlier, the puzzle design works well here. Using Ultra Hand to connect an orb to one of the floating platforms to hold it in place, genius. Moving the giant bubbles to create an electric current to open a door, awesome. But then you have the super fast spinning cube where I was looking for some sort of solution in the environment, only to realize the solution was to just use your bow in midair, which would slow down time. Extremely disappointing, as with only 4 terminals, I want all 4 of them to use the Water Temple's gimmicks to the fullest, not slowdown effects that are baked into Link's base kit. I had to look it up, I was so confused at launch. And then Muktarok, he may not be the worst boss in the series or anything, but by goodness, I struggle with his fight. Sidon's water ability was tough for me to get to grips with, and I had to resort to water-based inventory items to clear the muck. Had it stuck to its shark form in the goop, maybe it would have been more memorable, but knowing the boss is some anemic little squid, it's too goofy for me, especially when the other main dungeon bosses are all on a scale of epic to iconic. I do think though, with some of that initial disappointment wearing off, I would enjoy this dungeon more on a replay. At number 8, we have Jabu Jabu's Belly from Oracle of Ages. This is a polarizing dungeon, as you will either love it or hate it. For me, this is a dungeon that I think I would have enjoyed more had I simply been better at the navigation, because I spent a lot of time going back and forth between various floors with no idea what the actual progression path was. And anytime I feel like I'm actively wasting playtime because I'm hopelessly lost and refusing to use a guide, is time I feel could be spent playing something else. I'm an adult now with less time to game than when I was a kid. Between keeping up a social life, working on this channel, and spending time with my partner, those extra hours add up. And Jabu Jabu's water raising and lowering mechanic really caused me a lot of grief. It's a shame because I really like this dungeon. The puzzles are really well designed, the enemies are tough but fair, especially in rooms where I have to outrun bladers chasing me or steer clear of the water enemies swimming about, and the long switch upgrade can be found in this dungeon, which enhances the length of one of the best 2D items in the series. I ranked this number 5 in my Oracle of Ages dungeon ranking, so it's better than the average, and I'm impressed they managed to even get the water level raising and lowering to work with the Game Boy in the first place. But it's mainly held up by its interesting puzzle design and its reliance on the switch hook, which is already just a fun item to use. The mini-boss Anglerfish is pretty mid, and the main boss Plasmarine is far too simple for this late in the game, requiring you to do the bare minimum with the switch hook to succeed. It's the backtracking that keeps this dungeon this low for me, and nowhere is that more exemplified than with the boss key, which is locked behind 3 different doors, meaning if you missed a key, you gotta go back and find it, which can be a real pain in the ass depending on where said key actually is in the dungeon. And it also doesn't help that there is one other dungeon from Oracle of Ages on today's list that I felt flowed better and actually utilized the central gimmick of this game, which gives some bonus points. But hey, 8th place isn't half bad. At number 7, we have the Swamp Palace from A Link to the Past, which can be considered our first true water dungeon of the series. And I've always said this, despite being from one of the earliest games in the franchise, it does so much correct right off the bat. We immediately get puzzles in regards to raising and lowering water levels, which extends to how you even enter the palace. You have to first solve a simple block puzzle which gets you to a lever that raises the water level of the main entrance. This allows you to get into the palace proper, where you'll be focusing on lowering water levels to reach deeper floors and find keys. The fact that they already had a staple puzzle design for the series' water dungeons this early on was already iconic, but then you add that the dungeon item is the hook shot, which is one of the franchise's most iconic items, and you've got a real treasure trove of good ideas here. Almost like Ocarina of Time saw what worked in A Link to the Past and copied its homework beat for beat. The enemies here make a lot of sense, with the electric jellyfish being the most iconic of the bunch, but blades, stalfos, fire snakes, and turrets all create a fun challenge as you explore. It's not a terribly complex dungeon by any means, being fairly linear, but it has you bombing walls, flooding certain rooms to swim to other platforms, and once you have the hookshot, you'll be zipping across the screen to reach faraway areas with ease. We also have some red and blue switches and hammer blocks, the latter of which keeps the hammer item feeling fresh after its introduction in the previous dungeon. I especially love this room towards the end, where you have to find a path forwards through the many waterfalls. It's a simple trope, but brings me so much joy every single time. And how about this room, where you can drop to the left or the right, both leading to platforms of chests, but only one actually has the item needed to continue. The last room before the boss even has rushing water that you have to swim down to reach the right doorway. I wish this temple went further, making more navigation puzzles that involved rushing waterways and figuring out the right way to go. It's something future games would dabble in more often. But for everything the Swamp Palace does extremely well, I also have to admit that subsequent games did everything better. A Link Between Worlds literally does the same dungeon but gives it a far fresher redesign, while as I said earlier, Ocarina of Time takes all of its best bits and implements it into its water dungeon. And that's why I think the Swamp Palace is the perfect place to put at the center of this list, a lovely cutoff point separating the quality of the water dungeons before and the water dungeons after. At number 6, we have the Mermaid's Cave, found in Oracle of Ages. Compared to Jabu Jabu's Belly, the Mermaid's Cave isn't as intense on traditional water dungeon puzzles, but don't be fooled, it very much utilizes our titular element in its layout. This is the dungeon that grants you the mermaid suit, which completely changes your swimming controls in the game, and also allows you to dive underwater into completely new screens to explore. I was expecting something like Link's Awakening, where you'd have a couple static locations with 2D side-scroll moments underwater, but what we got were actual underground zones where you could explore with concepts like rushing water that pushes you around, enemies to avoid, pits you could fall down, and this even has a cool use with the boss fight against Octagon at the end of the dungeon. Seed shoot above, sword slash underwater, it's a really fun experience overall. But what takes the Mermaid's Cave to new heights is that it's one of the few dungeons in the game to actively utilize Oracle of Ages' signature gimmick, the power to go back and forth through time. Like the Spirit Temple in Ocarina of Time, you have to visit the Mermaid's Cave in both the present and the past, with the present variant containing the boss key and the dungeon item, while the past contains the boss and the Lonely Peak essence of time. Some fun puzzles include rotating turnstiles that you have to navigate through, rooms where when you hit a switch, the entire floor layout changes, and that seed shooter challenge right before the boss door. I never get tired of seed shooter puzzles in this game, they're just so fun to nail. Yes, Jabu Jabu's Belly is technically the better dungeon in this game from a puzzle perspective, and ends up doing far more with the underwater gimmick than the Mermaid's Cave does, but I just like how clean and concise the level design is in this dungeon, and it doesn't overstay its welcome. Plus, again, it uses the game's central mechanic to get you exploring multiple variations of the Mermaid's Cave, and I just think that's so smart. Not a top 5 water dungeon, but one that I think deserves to be in the conversation. At number 5, we have the Water Temple from Ocarina of Time. This isn't a bad dungeon, I refuse to be gaslit by the internet into thinking that. Just because you got lost here, little Timmy, when you were 7 years old or something, doesn't mean the level design is bad. Complex? Yes. Terrible? No! Now yes, you will run into moments where you find a locked door but have no key to unlock it. That is inevitable in this dungeon, and for some people that experience can be very frustrating, but I actually found it quite enjoyable here because the 3D space was easy to navigate, and there were only a handful of paths you could actually go if you analyzed every direction. Compared to Jabu Jabu's Belly from earlier, I found making my way around a 3D environment far easier than a 2D one. And the 3DS remake actually improved this dungeon too by marking the locations where you could raise the water level with clearer prompts, as well as giving us the ability to hot swap the iron boots without going into the pause menu. The actual dungeon itself is a mix of challenge and puzzle rooms. There's some block pushing, which is par for the course of this era of adventure games, but then you have the fun hookshot rooms like this one, where you hookshot up a series of waterfall platforms, or the iron boot rooms, like running through a rushing river rapid and avoiding whirlpools. And of course, we have the mini-boss against Dark Link, one of the most striking visual rooms in the dungeon with the foggy lake, the singular tree, and the eerie atmosphere, giving way to one of the more frustrating mini-bosses in the series. I suck at this fight, I use Din's Fire to cheese it, and I don't regret a thing. The only big downside to this dungeon is the boss. Morpha does nothing for me, and it's just a bit frustrating to fight at the best of times. I'd rather focus on the cool atmosphere or the way raising and lowering the water levels has an effect on how you explore the rest of the dungeon. That's what's fun here to me. Not my favourite water level in the series because the central gimmick can feel a bit slow, and backtracking is a tad overdone, but I think the water temple is still much better than the internet gave it credit for, and I hope it has a renaissance sooner rather than later. At number 4, we have the Swamp Palace from A Link Between Worlds, which just barely misses out on the bronze. This is a reimagining of the A Link to the Past dungeon, but instead features a brand new layout that is both compact and really entertaining to explore. The dungeon is split into 2 floors with identical layouts, with there being staircases leading between the upper and lower levels in every side room, as well as a few holes that you can drop down to reach some grated platforms and locked doors. The overall challenge here is to raise and lower the water levels of both floors of the dungeon so that you can collect keys to progress, with you ultimately trying to raise the level of the central room to access the boss door. My favourite room of the dungeon though is the lower floor's uppermost room, this rectangular corridor where you have to solve one puzzle to get the water flowing, which fills up a nearby pool that allows you to reach another puzzle to solve, which eventually gets the whole room filled with water. It's very simple but satisfying to watch, and leads directly into this dungeon's mini-boss encounter, which is also a pretty fun fight against a giant jellyfish. The dungeon truly opens up though when you reach the water level switches, as now you can raise and lower the water to your heart's content to collect the rest of the chests on the upper and lower floors. And the final room in the top floor's lower right even has you using your merge ability in conjunction with the hookshot to eventually get the water level just right. It's a dungeon where, if you want to reach the boss door and get that key, you can, but getting all those optional chests, that's where the fun of the dungeon really shines. Even the boss fight with Argus is a little enhanced compared to his Link to the Past counterpart, and while I think they could have gone a little further with him, I had a good time. No complaints. Except that fucking music track and that little beat in the back that overpowers the whole song, you know the one. At number 3, we have the Great Bay Temple from Majora's Mask. Back in 2011, I made a since-deleted YouTube video ranking my top 10 Zelda dungeons, and the Great Bay came in 5th place. Is it still in my top 5? Maybe not, but by God, it is still a great time, ladies and gentlemen. I think the Great Bay Temple has some cool ideas, and I will defend this dungeon to the death whether you like it or not. The main gimmick isn't about raising or lowering water levels like in most of the other games. Instead, it's about rerouting the water flow so that you can access new pipes in the main room, which will suck you in and spit you out in various points of the temple. This is quite a complicated setup, and on the original N64 confused a lot of people. So the remake on the 3DS added some arrows on top of the already existing color coordination to help you along your chosen routes. Though I personally never had an issue with the original myself, it's actually very hard to end up in the wrong place from the central room, as long as you remember to switch the direction of the water flow via the first room of the dungeon, you'll be fine. Most people forget this part though, as it's not exactly signposted particularly well. Aside from that, you'll be Zora swimming through underwater pathways and using ice arrows to solve various platforming puzzles. On the N64, you have full freedom on how to use the ice arrows, firing them wherever you want to create ice platforms you can jump across. But this also means you're in charge of their placements, and if you placed an ice platform incorrectly, such as in this room, you may not be able to target the hookshot icon above, which really sucks. The 3DS version, though, takes away all of this by only allowing you to shoot specific spots in the dungeon, an overcorrection to try and make the Great Bay easier, but which ultimately came across as simplifying game mechanics that didn't need to be simplified. This is a dungeon that, in my opinion, people hated on because they played it when they were younger and didn't fully understand what it was asking them to do. But if you know where you're going, you only need to change the direction of the water flow twice. The stray fairies are the only challenge here that might take you off course. I love activating the seesaws with water spouts, or doing platforming across moving machinery that I helped to turn on in the first place, and it's because I get the progression of this dungeon that I find it more fun than Ocarina's Water Temple. I'm never backtracking to find keys I missed or dealing with 3 different layers of water that can only be raised from different spots in the dungeon. I'm just zipping through pipes in my Zora form having an absolute blast. Hell, I even like Gjorg. He's fun to me, a bit of a damage sponge, but shocking him with the Zora electricity attack is satisfying, especially when it mows through the smaller fish it summons with ease. Maybe not the 3DS variant though, getting Gjorg to swallow mines is a trauma I don't wish to go back to. At number 2, we have the Temple of Droplets from the Minish Cap. Who could have seen this one coming? That one of my favourite water temples in the series is coming from a 2D Zelda game. I didn't, but then I played the Temple of Droplets and I thought, damn, I missed out on this for years. Now, to get the obvious out of the way, the Temple of Droplets is both a water dungeon and an ice dungeon, with a nice split of ice-based block-pushing puzzles and slippery physics in rooms with icy floors and the void all around. But we also have a massive underground river segment where you're using the Gust Jar to ride a lily pad through various large rooms, solving puzzles and swimming underwater to help unlock barricades to progress further. This dungeon also takes place in Lake Hylia, which helps with the theming a lot. My favourite thing is how you immediately find the boss key and unlock the boss door, only to find the element you need as well as the boss completely frozen. So you have to explore the main bulk of the dungeon to unfreeze them and claim your prize. This dungeon is rather linear, with you taking the left path first, which takes you down the Lilypad River and through some darkened rooms, before wrapping back to the main hall. Then the right path opens up, allowing you to explore the rest of the dungeon. While my favourite part of the dungeon is the Lilypad River, I like a lot of the icy rooms too, and the lantern, a fairly boring item in most Zelda games, is actually useful here due to its ability to light up dark rooms and torches. They make the most of it in the second half, which I really appreciate. Some other memorable rooms I like involve this one with these spiked rollers where you have to dive underwater to avoid them, or this maze-like room where you have to lighten torches as you go to find the correct path. And again, the Lilypad segment just really sticks out in my mind as such a memorable set piece. Dropping down a vast waterfall and piloting your way through an underwater maze is so much fun that I don't even mind the linearity of the temple. The only downside is that the boss fight against the giant red Octorok is a bit mid. It's clumsy from a mechanical standpoint, an issue that our final entry on today's list does not have. At number 1, we have the Ancient Cistern from Skyward Sword. I can't be contrarian, guys, we all knew this was coming. It was my favourite dungeon from Link's first adventure in the timeline, and it's one of the best dungeons in the franchise. But why is the Ancient Cistern so damn beloved? To put it simply, the Ancient Cistern has a very distinct point of view in the way it was developed and the aesthetics it presents, which then translates into extremely strong puzzle design that ties into those themes to create something truly spectacular. Based off of the short story The Spider's Thread, every part of this dungeon's design is in service of this aesthetic, from the upper half being themed around the Buddhist variant of heaven, complete with lotus lilies and a golden sheen, while the lower half is themed around hell, complete with dark undead creatures, a purple atmosphere, and a lake of poison that is the PG variation of the Lake of Blood from the story. You explore the upper half of the dungeon, climbing vines, jumping across lily pads, and solving puzzles to eventually reach the whip, while getting a brief look at the hells below. Then you explore the lower dungeon, completing a series of difficult platforming puzzles with rotating platforms, using your whip to get to further places, and just generally exploring the darkened underground floor. The most iconic moment is the Spider's Thread though, where you have to climb a white thread to the upper floor while undead bokoblins try to pull you back down to earth. Luckily, the story ends with us escaping to heaven, unlike the source material that sent the criminal Kandata back down to hell. The way both layers could have been their own dungeon theme is impressive enough, but melding them together to create such a contrast is what makes the Ancient Cistern stand out. Side note, I love in the upper portion, if you choose to swim down for this rupee, you get crushed by Buddha's hand for your greed. What a lesson to teach the kids. And of course, the Ancient Cistern is topped off with the best boss fight in the game, Koloktos, who uses the dungeon item to great effect as you chop off its limbs and destroy its core to win the fight. You could argue that the water in this dungeon wasn't used to the same extent as previous entries on this list, but the first half has you swimming through water, using the whip to flip water lilies to create platforms, and the way you get between the layers involves jumping into water pipes that suck you around Great Bay style. So who cares if it doesn't use water in the same way as the Water Temple? It's still one of Zelda's finest dungeon achievements, and I don't think it's being topped anytime soon. And that's my list. Do you disagree with my water dungeon placements? Let me know down below, and be sure to parry that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all my future videos. My social medias are on screen now, feel free to follow me if you're comfortable. I have my Blue Sky, my Twitch, and my Discord. A massive shout out to my YouTube channel members, by the way. $4.99, get a shout out in the description, end of video as well, and you get access to my Dark Souls 3 Soul Level 1 Let's Play. So thanks for watching everyone, and I'll see you next time. Adios.